By the year 2050, 1 in 4 people on the planet will be African. The choices that we make now across Africa will shape the world's collective future. Welcome to The Youth Bloom, where we explore the stories, the trends, and the issues we face in the present that will define the coming decades. I'm your host, Catherine Nzuki. Chad, one of the world's lowest income countries, is now home to 1.8 million displaced and stateless people. 1 million displaced people in Chad are escaping the brutal conflict in neighboring Sudan, and half of the refugees in Chad are children. Chad's population is approximately 20 million, and 42% of the population lives below the poverty line. This means that for both locals and forcibly displaced people, they both lack the same life essentials such as water, food, and healthcare. Today, I'm joined by the director of the UN Refugee Agency Regional Bureau for West and Central Africa.
My name is Abdouraouf Gnon-Konde. I'm the Regional Bureau Director for UNHCR covering West and Central Africa, and then I'm based in Dakar, Senegal.
Abdouraouf is here to help us understand how Chad, one of the world's poorest countries, has been hit by the world's largest displacement crisis and the limited options available to both the Chadian government and Chadian communities to provide resources for locals and refugees. Abdouraouf, welcome.
Thanks a lot.
So just to start off, may you please provide us with some context on the drivers of displacements in Chad's neighboring countries?
Since April 2023, as we all know, since the eruption of conflict with the violence that we have seen in Sudan, the Sudan crisis is being characterized as one of the worst humanitarian crises we have on the continent. And as a matter of fact, close to 9 million individuals have seen their life disrupted and being displaced within Sudan. And then on top of it, we have close to 4 or 5 million individuals who have also been displaced across the borders in neighboring countries, including Chad. I know that Chad is the main topic, of our conversation today, but it's good to know that the displacement across the borders from Sudan is not just in Chad. We have seen Sudanese refugees reaching the borders of Egypt, in Ethiopia, in Uganda, in Central Africa Republic. And since I'm covering West and Central Africa Republic, so the two countries affected by the situation of the Sudan crisis are both Chad, where we have seen the arrival of close to 900,000 refugees since April 2023, and close to 50,000 new Sudanese refugees in Central Africa Republic.
And, what's the situation like today in Chad for displaced people? And maybe specifically, what's it like in the Chad-Sudan border area?
If you look at what's happening today at the border between Chad and Sudan, we have seen the arrival, as I was just saying, 900,000 individuals, but this comes on top of the 420,000 Sudanese refugees who were in the country since 2003. So meaning that we are nearly, getting close to 1.3 million individuals. And then unfortunately, our planning figure is that we may well reach the threshold of 1 million Sudanese refugees since April 2023 in Chad. 1 million new refugees, plus the 420,000, so meaning 1.4 million Sudanese refugees in one of the poorest countries that we have in the world. You just mentioned it. If you look at, the development indicators in a country like Chad, you get it all. Electricity, for instance, the number of people, who have access to electricity in Chad is less than 11% of the total population. The life expectancy, in Chad is below 57 years. And then if you add maybe the literacy rate, I think it's below 27% of the total population. So that gives you, the scale and magnitude of the need for a poor country like Chad accepting deliberately to have a welcome policy and open its border to welcome their brothers and sisters, despite the challenges that, they have. Today, we believe that one person in three at the border area between Chad and Sudan on the Chadian side is a refugee. One person in three. And in total, if you take the country, Chad itself, one person in 14 is a refugee.
I mean, that's just staggering.
Staggering.
And I really want to pull on something you just mentioned, which is this very moral, I feel, approach that Chad has taken to welcoming their brothers and sisters across the border. Because at a time when migration is so politically rife and so contentious, at a time where a lot of countries have taken a militarized approach to addressing migration, Chad hasn't closed its borders. It hasn't militarized its borders. And I want to know what the reasoning behind this very, to me, sounds moral approach to being a safe haven, in a country that doesn't have enough resources for its locals, much less migrants.
I was asking myself the same question until I went on a mission to Chad and I met with the authorities at the highest level. Then I was asking, how come? What's happening? Because this is not the same rhetoric that we hear in other places of the world. And they told me this: listen, Abdouraouf, we ourselves have been displaced. We have been refugees. Some of us were welcome in Sudan. This is where we grew up. This is where we study. So it's our time and then our turn, to show hospitality and generosity to our brothers and sisters who have been, going through this dramatic situation. So for them, it's a deliberate choice. And then I can tell you that if you look at the whole legislative framework around the asylum issues, it's amazing. Chadian authorities have decided to give access to services, to opportunities to the refugees, just like Chadian, without any difference. It's just amazing. But of course, as the crisis will prolong, the hospitality may be eroded. And this is why I think this conversation we are having, it's really an opportunity for me to echo, and appeal for the support that could come from international community. Chadians will not be able to do it alone. They have open borders. They are giving access to land. The main economic source of revenue in that country is agriculture. And they are willing to see refugees working and producing so that in terms of economic opportunity, no one is left behind.
I want to get to the tensions that are emerging in that border area, but it's worth highlighting. We're in July of 2025. Things may change, things will change. There's been a lot of negative news, there's a lot of bad news in the world, but I almost want to pinpoint or anchor us in this moment where one of the poorest countries in the world has been more moral, more accepting than countries with vast resources, right? And things change and things will change, but I want to just pinpoint this moment that we're in and the generosity. But as you alluded to, there have been some tensions already rising between Chadian people who live in the border area and refugees settling there. Can you tell us more about these tensions?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Maybe I can give you the example of two, border towns. Adre was, since the beginning of the crisis, the influx in 2023, the main entry point. A small town at the border between the two countries where I think the total population prior to the displacement was close to something like 40,000, 40,000 individuals living there in that small town. And today, that same town of Adre has been overcrowded with the presence of close to 240,000 individuals living in makeshift shelters scattered around. So you can imagine.
The population is almost multiplied by 6.
That's the main challenge. It's like a sort of accelerated, urbanization or villagization of such area where, 40,000 used to live there. So how do you organize? Maybe just to start with security. How do you ensure that the children, because the main composition of the influx is mainly children and women. How do you protect those children? How do you protect, the women? How do you ensure that access to education facilities, health facilities for everyone? And also that we don't see tensions. And then I just mentioned the access to land. How do you organize such access to land so that it's made in a way that the host communities doesn't have the impression that, their resources are strained because of the presence of, in quotes, refugees or foreigners. So that's the challenge. Responding to the immediate needs of the newcomers, providing emergency shelters, food, medicine, because most of the people that we see at the border areas, some of them, carry literally the wounds of the level of violence they have been through. In Sudan, some are arriving traumatized. So this requires an immediate attention. But after 2 years, 3 years, clearly this is not life-saving. It requires much more medium-term and longer-term intervention. So how do we do it? As a humanitarian actor, a protection actor, it's a challenge.
And, I want to build on that because in crises like these, we expect the UN Refugee Agency to be there, right? With limited budgets, but just doing their best to provide life-saving support. And after a 6 month, 1 year, a year and a half timeline, adjusting to help people at least have the basic needs, food, shelter, healthcare. But with the global aid cuts, UNHCR's budget has decreased drastically. So, I'm curious, what types of interventions would you have done if you had the same funding levels you did? And now, given these aid cuts, how are you doing, less with less? I'm quoting your colleague Arjun, who put it very succinctly.
Definitely. First and foremost, for us, this conversation also gives me a chance to really, applaud the donors who have been supporting us since the beginning of this emergency to provide us the resources and, more importantly, the flexibility, to adjust the way that we could accommodate the response and make sure that we respond to the needs, on the ground. Just to give you an idea, last year, the US alone in the region, across the region, West and Central Africa, we have received close to 58% of our total income coming from the US. And that has allowed us somehow to organize ourselves and quickly shift the team and make sure that it's being properly organized along the borders. As a matter of fact, we were able to open close to 7-8 camps very quickly along the border so that we could receive all these refugees. And with this reduction that we are all going through, it comes with a lot of challenges. How then can we readjust and make sure that we don't lose the capacity on the ground? It's not just UNHCR, because we have even seen other partners, NGOs, CRS, Catholic Relief Services, Norwegian refugees, all of them, all these NGOs who are also complementing the multi-sectoral response that, we provide to those refugees and host communities, because it's important to not forget the host communities as well. So today our resources are strained and we see it. We have difficulties to provide even emergency shelter. We have difficulty to provide, food. All of us, we have a difficulty to provide medicine, shelter, I'm mentioning it. So it's so difficult. The humanitarian environment is worsening, unfortunately, and security is increasing. And this is where we see tensions here and there in terms of access to, meager resources that exist in those environments, like access to land, access to water. So for us, it would be a pity to have a country like Chad willing to do the right thing, the communities welcoming, a country that has equipped itself deliberately with the legislative framework to give access and facilitate the inclusion of the refugees, and not getting the right support that could, make sure that that country doesn't fall apart.
They can't do it alone.
This is exactly what we are saying. And as humanitarian actor, this is where we reach the limit of our capacity and we need others to step in. And as a matter of fact, we are working closely with development actors like the World Bank. Yesterday, I've met with the World Bank teams. I also met with IMF. And today, after our conversation, it's planned that I'm also going to meet with IFC, the private sector of the World Bank. So we are diversifying, our sources of income. We are also talking to other donors, the EU INSPA, and we see countries like UK, Germany, France, increasing the support, not necessarily directly to us, but at least to the government, to show that Chad is not left alone to deal with such massive influx. Maybe one point worth mentioning, in total in the region, we are talking about 3 million refugees. And at the beginning of this conversation, as I told you, we have close to 1.3, 1.4 million. So meaning that one refugee in two in the region live in Chad.
Wow. And, before, because I want to pull on something you mentioned in passing, which is flexible funding. Why is that so important to humanitarian actors like you to have that flexibility in how these funds are allocated? Does it make your response easier and quicker?
That's exactly the beauty of that flexibility, is to be in the capacity almost overnight. There's an issue, there's an emergency, quickly be there. And this is what the US has been giving us. It's not just the volume and the quantity, but the flexibility that comes with it, so that we can shift and be present and respond to the need of those who need it most.
And, back to the fact that around 1 in 3 refugees in the region is in Chad.
1 in 2.
1 in 2. Thank you. This podcast focuses on the lives of African youth and the opportunities or the lack thereof that we have. And I would like to hear more about the long-term outlook for displaced people, focusing on young people, but really just displaced people in the region, and how displacement, like forceful displacement, is shaping their lives and can shape the outcomes for them. What are the ripple effects down the line?
I mean, if you take many countries in the region, including Chad, those who are below 20 years old represent close to 65% of the total population in each country. So this is exactly the same demographic that you see within the forcibly displaced, the refugees. And their dream is to get an education, a qualification. They are ready to do everything because they know how powerful the education is in their lives. So despite the fact that they are displaced, one of the key asks is to pursue and continue the education opportunities. But unfortunately, if you travel and you go to the border between Sudan and Chad, and on the Chadian side, this is a challenge because sometimes there are no schools in those areas. So we need to set up very quickly, some education facilities with the support coming from some donors like Education Cannot Wait. And we work closely with UNICEF, our education partner, with the government, but it's not enough. And this is where maybe it's worth mentioning that even the teachers, the majority of them are being recruited among refugees. So that gives you an indication that refugees are not coming, with nothing. They come with the capacity. So at least in that sector, many of them, were working as teachers. So in Chad, during the presence, the government has accepted to use them and include them as part of, the education workforce. So this is amazing. So since the youth want to continue to have access to education, the Chadian authorities are doing everything possible to ensure that this is being given. Now, what comes next is, if you have your degree, if you have a qualification, then what about the job? This is another challenge. So practical education, formal education is important, as, the vocational training as well. I just mentioned that agriculture is a key entry point, for sustainable response for most of the refugees so that they can product themselves and then feed for themselves. You see? So for us, the youth are struggling in that area. And the main objective of the government of Chad and the international community is, how do we stabilize those youth? And we have seen it. Some of them, because, their response was not coming quickly, have decided to move forward. And today, if you go to Libya, you will see close to 240,000 Sudanese refugees, mostly youth, who have passed through Chad, but have decided to pursue the journey. And one of the reasons when you talk to them is lack of education opportunities. This is what they will say. So this is one of the main challenges when it's come to the youth residing, in this difficult area at the border between Sudan and Chad.
In the end of the day, I think, especially because the question of migration is so political and so politicized and so acrimonious, and not only in this part of the world, in a lot of parts of the world. I think we just forget that most people don't want to leave the place that they're from, right? We're talking about forcibly displaced people, and you put it so well, but it's almost like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like, people want education, they want a roof over their heads, they want access to healthcare, and they want a way to make an income, like a way to make a livelihood to support themselves and then eventually their families. And I think that gets lost in all of this. So when we're saying, there's 1 million refugees in Sudan, that is 1 million people who were forced from their homes and now have to find a way to support themselves and their families. Like that's what gets lost in all of this. And so maybe to wrap up the introduction to this podcast, it just says, by 2050, 1 in 4 people in the world will be African. Between now and 2050, we're expected to add 1 billion more people. So, Abdouraouf, either as yourself or maybe with your UN hat on, what are you hoping to see done now that would mean 25 years from now, existing and coming generations of Africans are able to live healthy, dignified lives? Like, what are the changes you want to see now that can ensure safe, prosperous lives for all of us down the line?
I mean, this is a very large question, but I travel a lot across the region. And of course, I meet all these refugees, young refugees, as well as, the youth in general. And I'm sure that if there is a proper policy in place in all these countries that really trusts, the youth, it would be amazing what they can do. They want to have a seat around the table. They don't want others to decide for them. They know what they want. So for us, if those in charge at the decision-making level can do what it takes to give the space, give a voice, to those youth and listen to them, it will be amazing how they can quicker help the continent, to move ahead. I believe in that. One of our power is the youth, but we need to invest. We all need to invest in education. We have to invest on the capital. We call it human capital. If we want them to be in the capacity to really play the role and make this continent advance, what do they need? Education, opportunities. I just mentioned today, when we started this conversation, that the level of literacy in Chad was below 27%. So what does it mean? The education is not just a need for the refugees. Even the youth in Chad, they need to get access to that opportunity. So in a country like Chad, how do we make sure that through education, we give a chance to improve the future of the youth among the refugees, but also among the host community? Then I'm sure that if we find the right resources, the investment that comes with it, they don't want to leave, they want to stay and be useful to their own countries and communities.
Abdouraouf, I can't agree more. Merci beaucoup. Thank you for your time.
Merci for giving us a chance to really bring a voice to one of the worst humanitarian crises which is going on the continent, the Sudan crisis.
I hope next time you're in DC, you'll come back.
Merci.
And we can talk
Definitely,
more.
I will come.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for tuning in. This podcast is produced by Gina Kim and our music is by Wonderchild. If you have any suggestions for future topics, you can find me on X and Instagram at @KatherineNzuki_.